Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw. Adina Goldman.
Hi.
Adina Goldman is joining me on Shooting It Raw. Thank you for joining me. I think of you as somebody who's very switched on about media, about image making, about just overall switched on. So, love to have you on the podcast. Lovely, so good to see you. So, you're in Toronto. I'm in Hong Kong. I asked you, sent me some pictures. You sent me some pictures. Let's just dive right into it. The one of a girl facing a flamingo. Okay, let me describe it. The photo is of somebody holding, so I could just see the thumb of somebody holding a snapshot, that is a black and white snapshot of a girl seen from behind, staring through a chain link fence at. You could just make out a flamingo off in the distance. Yes. Why this picture?
I just received this picture from my uncle. He had a roll of black and white photography from my childhood, from when I was 3, from a trip he made to Vancouver.
Oh, nice.
And he's been going through all of his stuff at the behest of his very organized wife to clear out all the photos he's taken. It's a really interesting thing because I do remember being that age. It's at 3 you start to... it's a picture of me.
Yeah.
At 3, and I remember being 3. It's when I had my first, I guess, episodic memory. Is that what you call it?
I guess, yeah.
I remember how it felt. I remember family dynamics. I remember my uncle visiting because it was always a big deal when he came from Toronto to Vancouver. Mm-hmm. It was the Vancouver Zoo. I was wearing a cardigan that my grandmother had knitted, and I was wearing a little sort of plaid jumper that my mother had worn when she was a little girl.
I mean, your uncle it's a very good photograph. Like, just by itself as an image, it's very arresting. It's like the knit of the sweater you're wearing, the hair, the little white socks and the little kid baby shoes. It's so like and also the chain link fence. It's so beautiful, really.
Yeah, it's a good photo. I think that somewhere somebody had a larger version of it blown up in their house when I was growing up.
Oh, wow.
So I hadn't seen it for a long time, but it was very familiar when I did see it.
Yeah. And so did you make a photo of you? Is that your thumb holding up the photo?
Yes.
So that's another interesting layer, because if it was just the image, just flat image, but here we're actually observing it.
I feel like it's interesting that, in the past 3 months, time has been really strange for people. Mm-hmm. And in a way, because we've been so removed from the pace of society and the, sort of capitalist, idea of, getting on that treadmill every day and consuming and doing and achieving, that now that so many of us I'm still working, but I'm still being taken away from so many of those extra distracting and tiring activities. It's freed up a lot of time to be in touch with memories and past. Mm-hmm. So I've been in touch with a lot of friends and family that I haven't really spoken with for a long time, and I've actually been speaking with them. It's nice to speak with you too.
I know, like us. I love it.
Yeah, me too. But yeah, I just think that what's interesting about that and having that in my hands is just because so much memory has been close at hand. So much of my past seems closer than it ever was.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it was a real gift to see that again.
It's because in a way, now that you mention it, the pace, wake up, go to work, earn money, come back home, spend money, do the things, boom, boom, boom. It's constant, like, okay, on to the next month, on to the next month, on to the next month. Whereas now everybody's kind of a little bit more domestic or sort of contained within their homes. So they're kind of facing each other more, maybe thinking more about their past. Yes.
Dreaming more about it as well.
And dreaming more. Okay. But we're also getting more time to connect, to sit back and reflect. And in a way, it's a gift, right? Like for those of us where it is a gift, it's nice to be able to sit there and then, you showed me your dining room where where your son is eating a bowl of soup, and it's just like, it was a perfect moment. You know, it's just like, it's like a gentle, oh, that's nice.
It is nice.
It's beautiful.
You know, there are so few meals that we have together during the week because he's so busy with soccer, usually, and school.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, let's move to the next photo, because you sent me some really interesting ones. The next one that in the sequence you sent me, it's the what are they called? The flower it's on a sidewalk, just kind of growing there. The one that you can eat the flowers. What's it called?
Nasturtium.
Nasturtium. Yes.
Nasturtium. Sorry. Yeah. Nasturtium.
So, wait. On a scale of 1 to 10, how stoned are you now?
0.
Okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, how stoned am I? 0. Perfect. 0. Perfect. Sometimes I have people on who've been, not necessarily stoned, but who've been drinking a lot of wine. It's kind of fun. So why this photo of the nasturtiums?
It's the only thing that I've grown from a seed.
Adina. Wait,
you can grow a green pepper from a pepper that you eat. I remember that story.
Right. Or corn from a popcorn, whatever. Yeah. But
I've never had a garden before that I've been able to water and grow things in.
Okay.
And I now have a back and front garden, and I've planted and watered and grown things myself.
Oh, that's wicked.
Only seed that I've planted that grew. And so I'm very proud. So that was the first flower that came out of the nasturtium.
That's beautiful. So, that's great. Okay, so
now there are many of them.
I don't know. Yeah, well, okay. I don't know where you guys are living now. You guys have a nice space, like a nice yard, and is it nice and open? And so is it like a haven and a refuge, or is it just, just cozy and warm?
It's cozy. Chris puts a lot of work into making it beautiful. And I've been, I said I've been planting things outside and in the back. It's got a little back porch, and we've been growing things in pots and in the ground, and taking our home more seriously too, just spending more time putting up art and setting up shelves and finally unpacking all of our books. And it feels good.
Okay, so aesthetically, you in university, we were both in creative writing. Yeah, and then in terms of your maturation and development, would you say that how much is writing, how much is graphic communication a part of your life now?
Not much.
Okay.
Yeah, I miss it.
Okay. So what keeps you busy these days?
I don't have a lot of time alone.
Okay.
I don't have a whole lot of time alone to reflect on things and to write. And I miss it, where everyone's always home. Although Chris is out today, which was nice for him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just don't get a whole lot of time to sit down and write something. And never mind, I used to keep journals. As I was unpacking all of my books, I came across all these journals that I used to write in, and very mediocre poetry. But it was.
We're our worst critic. Come on.
It was bad.
You're a good writer. You're a good writer.
But I had a chance to, have a blog for 10 years, and that was a much more muted form of communication, but a much farther reaching form than, your workshop and creative writing class.
Sure.
You would never make strangers read your poetry.
Right.
But, it was a chance for me at least to get in the exercise of sitting down and writing something.
Yeah.
But as I started to understand that, you had a blog as well, Portraiture.
Sure. Yep.
As I started to understand that the audience was larger and more strange and more intimate than I had really fully understood when I started it, it really changed what I wrote about. And it became odd because, people are so literal in a way that they should know better. They should know that what you're writing is not everything that's going on.
Right. And people are very reacting. And people that are separate from your life, and you're just like, hey, wait a second. Okay, so Shark Rescue. I ran Shark Rescue for a while, and then I revived Shark Rescue, And then I thought, okay, I'll make some masks, some COVID-19 masks with shark rescue. I thought they looked great. So I made them, put them out there. All of a sudden, I'm getting people out of the woodwork. I'm just like, who are you that are coming in and coming out like, oh, you're such a sheeple wearing masks. But yeah, so people react with so violently and angrily at stuff. And you're just like, why are you taking time out of your life to criticize what? Like, just move on. Yeah. So I could totally see how you write this blog and then over time you feel like, in a way, you have to cater to people's expectations, or not be too intimate, or keep like future employment in mind. Or, right.
I went back actually recently, and I used to write rants about like 2 massive soccer summers where people would honk all night. So I wrote like rants about Portuguese soccer fans at 2 a.m. because I was and they would like, yell faggot, friends, And I was just pissed at this general machismo and of the neighborhood and how obnoxious everybody was being. But I went back and I realized, wow, like I'm a manager now, and what I've written sounds racist. And I went back and I deleted that too. Okay. There's so many things that we've changed the way we talk about things. Even like going back and like, I work on different shows and documentaries. And some of the descriptions about things that we've written about have changed, right. Like especially like language around transgender identity, has become very, very different in the past 3 years. Like there's so much of language that's become so specific and so rigid, for better or for worse. I don't mean rigid as an insult.
Mm-hmm. No, I understand what you're trying to say. For sure. Well, look, we're talking. I'm in Hong Kong. The security law has just come through. And now everybody's just like, okay, what am I allowed to say? And even now speaking with you. So it's and especially as people who got original training or, got steeped into this idea of communication and writing and language. I mean, that's inside you and it's inside me, right? So all of a sudden to have to think about what you write, to be so, in some cases, afraid. I don't know.
And there's, there are different types of fear. Like, to go back to what we were talking about before about like taking precautions, cleaning up the place, taking your role seriously so that other people can live freely and don't die. You think about language around what some people dismiss as political correctness. Like, there is power in language, and it's annoying to have to like, I have to remember that this person has the they pronoun and not a she pronoun. Like there's sometimes it's annoying for people to have to do that. And also, for me, we did have a gender non-binary person in our staff last year, and I was so surprised at how much I kept messing it up. Like I was not prepared to incorporate they in an organic way. I had to really think about it and really I was like repeating it to myself in the morning. I'm like, don't fuck it up. Like, just do it.
But what happens if you fuck it up? Like, is it really, I mean, people are, okay, so here, maybe that's a bigger question. Is language, since it's so fluid and communally agreed upon, and obviously it's going to shift and sway away from, what happens to the speaker and what happens to the receiver, right? Like how, I understand it's very sensitive territory. Maybe you don't want to go into it, but. I
first of all, I think that if you're doing it with, good intentions, if you're doing it, if you're putting forth effort and still fucking up, I think people have, forgiveness. Some people are picky regardless.
Right.
Like in life, there are people who quote and people who are picky, and I'm forgiving. Like, you're just going to come across them. My personality is that I want to make people feel okay. Right.
Hey,
I work hard at that.
I've talked about this on a couple of podcasts so far. I read this book. It's written as a kind of a Socratic dialogue between the Japanese guys who are really influenced by Adlerian psychology. And so it's written like a master talking to a sort of an apprentice. And it's a translation, but it's called The Courage to be Disliked. It's an interesting thing where, at one point he actually references like a Talmudic philosopher saying, in a room of 10 people, you can expect that one person, regardless of what you do, is not going to like you. And that's actually just math. That's just like a normal distribution. One person is not going to like you. One person is going to love you and completely connect with you. And, everything you say is just going to be 100%. And then you got 8 people who are just like, meh, they're not, they're at best, they don't really care about you. And at best, they're ambivalent. So unfortunately, we pay attention to the one person who doesn't like us. But what we should do is pay attention to the one person who does like us and just not give a shit about the person who doesn't like us.
Oh, man, I wish I could do that.
I see it on your face. I see it on your face.
Well, anyway, in this case, it was really about, trying to retrain my brain for a good cause. A good cause. It's such to diminish this person's identity.
Right.
But, it's effort. It's kind of a pain in the ass, like wearing a mask, to keep trying to circle back to that analogy because it's working for me. But, we do things that are a pain in the ass to protect people, to make them feel good, to make them feel safe, and especially people who are vulnerable.
Right.
And this person also had, a physical disability and, they're transgender, or not transgender, they're non-binary, but they're also really kind of like very, very much trying to sort of seek justice in every situation. They were very young.
Okay, yeah.
And I learned a lot from them. I really did. But I was actually surprised at how sort of like creaky my brain was, and that it took me longer than I had expected to sort of adapt to the language.
Right. Well, it's hard to unbreak. Yeah, it's hard to unbreak such deep patterns of ultimately, like, language is thinking, right? So it's like you have to unseed that. Yeah. Nasturtiums, though, beautifully composed. Great photo. This is what I love. Like, I love kind of bouncing between the photos and seeing where the conversation goes.
So nasturtiums, I planted a whole bunch of other stuff too, but I'm actually really pissed because there's a lady on our street who steals plants.
What? That is just not cool.
And this is like the 5th thing she's stolen.
What? That's so. Canada is really weird sometimes. That's really weird.
I know.
Every once in a while, I think about like they're weird things about in Canada that, like, for example, over here, you could drop your wallet. You leave your car open, leave the door. You like 7.5 million people. You can drop your wallet wherever, and people will return it. Like, they'll look inside, they'll find your, and this is consistent. You can leave your, like, the civil society in Hong Kong is amazing. But then in Canada, I remember, like, when I was in Victoria and in Montreal, it's just like some people are just peculiar, like coming to steal your plants. What?
Yeah. Anyway, I've been thinking about her because I know it's this one lady, and when she's caught stealing people's plants, she pretends she doesn't speak English.
What language does she choose?
Portuguese. And I went to Google Translate today after she stole a beautiful, not cheap, echinacea flower that I was growing.
Oh, wow. Okay. How do you say go fuck yourself in Portuguese?
I put up like stuff like, what was it? No para de rubar, like, no se plantas. And put that up on some wooden chopsticks and a sticky note.
Awesome.
At the scene of the crime.
This is like this whole like little story. I love it. Well, that's really funny. That's really good.
It's a beautiful flower.
Yeah, it is. And the key is now, the signal to you is to plant more.
Proceed, maybe. It's too late.
Okay, next photo. You could have the one of the shadows. It looks like maybe in front of your garden, actually. Oh, I love it. So in focus is the foreground of the shadow on sidewalk. it must be night because it looks like street light shadows, and it looks like somebody, if that's you, some taller person leaning over and giving you a kiss or giving the shadow a kiss on the cheek. Yeah, what's this photo?
It's funny because you say this some taller person, and it's Gabriel.
Oh, okay.
This fall, or this winter, I guess, he passed me in height, and he's been growing ever since.
How dare he?
And his voice has gotten deeper, and he's so proud of being taller than me that he lords it over me, but he's still
he's your
likes
baby.
To snuggle and give me kisses, and he's still my baby. And we went for a walk that night, just because I don't get out very much, because I wake up in this room, and then I go and I work here.
Wow.
Wow. And I spend so many hours in this bedroom, and it was nighttime. I wanted to go for a walk and stretch my legs, and I asked Gabriel to come with me, and we went for ice cream, and then we walked a bit more, and he kept stopping and giving me spontaneous little hugs. And it was so sweet. And then he wanted to take that picture of our shadows because it was proof positive that he was taller than me.
And that's what I nail. Sorry. But it's actually it's a really great image because the light's interesting, the focus is interesting, and it's romantic, but it's not romantic in a sexual, but very loving. It's a very loving moment. Yeah, no, it's beautiful. It's aesthetically pleasing. In other words, fly. Yeah, it's great.
In other words, it is fly.
It is really good. I love it. Okay, the next photo then is way more literal.
That's just a bonus for you.
Oh, that's just a bonus for me. Okay, so I won't put it up on the website, but you look taller than him in that photo.
Well, there you go. Because he's leaning over to kiss me.
Right.
This is short, Mom.
That is really such a good photo.
You can put that up if you want. I don't mind.
Okay. Well, okay, sure. So here's the thing. Like, I think people who don't know you, and the way I know you, you're very rational, considerate, thoughtful, in a way about media that I don't see other people. Maybe it's because that's what your work is, and maybe because this is where where your brain lives. You're like, okay, that's just the way the world makes sense. But most people would not necessarily. Most people don't think like you, right? And so, is that where what you've been working in? Is that in that area still, or is your work way more specialized?
No, it's still where I work. I still work in media.
Okay.
I work at CBC.
Okay.
And I work on factual and documentary stories.
Amazing.
It's funny because I've been doing this kind of work for more than 20 years now.
Oh, wow.
And I started doing this work when the internet was really new. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we would alter websites with HTML and then FTP them to the server. Mm-hmm. And, when I also started, I was hanging out with a lot of people who were really big technology optimists. Mm-hmm. And I really bought into it. I mean, I'd studied creative writing. There did not seem to be a logical career path from that point.
No, it's an arts degree. And, it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. It was, I wasn't one of those people who took a commerce cluster.
Right.
I had taken a religion course and English literature and creative writing and nothing that could translate into something, that
commercial.
Yeah. And, there's advertising, there's publishing that seem to sort of, people who are creative and people who are good with language seem to be rewarded in those fields. Mm-hmm. And then I looked at those fields and they seemed like real sort of very established and very sort of stuck with certain people who were connected in certain ways. Advertising, as politically I became more awake, was problematic.
Yeah.
And publishing seemed to be a bit of a snake pit, and not very lucrative.
Yeah.
And also just way too many smart people with literature degrees. The competition was
I get that.
And then the internet happened, and suddenly there was an opportunity to grow, and, being in your early 20s and being able to do very basic web stuff meant that people wanted to hire you to be their web person.
Mm-hmm.
And the bar was quite low.
No, that was... I think different. There's a book by a guy called Adrian Bejan who writes about. He tries to explain behavior in a way, like human behavior, in some ways, through the laws of physics, right, and thermodynamics. And essentially, it's like the idea of things prefer to go through the paths of least resistance. And it's not because of out of laziness. It's just, if you think of a rivulet of water, when it rains, they coalesce into larger rivulets and they just keep going in that direction. And that just kind of happens very naturally, in quotes. But it's just, in the same way, like if you have all these flows of opportunity and one of them for you was internet and whatever, as opposed to going into advertising, you were drawn toward it. It just kind of fell in that way. And everybody's in the same way as my career, other people's career, just takes these crazy channels that sometimes are absurd. But so you're at CBC for 20 years, or is it other different companies? No. Okay.
A bunch of different companies, mostly just like big media companies.
Okay.
I've worked for most of them.
Okay. Wow.
Well, I guess I was just thinking about the internet and the optimism, and if you think about the laws of thermodynamics, like it's a path of least resistance, but the internet had this ability to sort of, it was a tool of conduction, like of ideas and shared values and niche community and finding your people. And early days of message boards were like that too. I really felt like I believed it. I believed that it was going to make the world a better place.
Right.
I was making friendships with people from parts of the world I never get a chance to visit. And I was meeting people with like weird interests and things that I was also interested in, who I never would have met in person. I never would have gone to their, small city, halfway across North America. I met so many people and reconfigured my social life in a way that has impact and continues to impact me. I'm still friends with these people.
Yeah. Given your place now and your perspective, like now everything seems to be really fractured. It's kind of like everything seems to be siloed even more and fractured even more. So what's your opinion on that in terms of sharing or breaking out of your own?
There's this really famous web, people were writing think pieces back in the day too.
Sure.
There's so many of them now, exponentially more. But, I don't think it was Clay Shirky. It was someone like that who, of his sort of caliber and generation, who had been to this sort of gathering of like-minded people. It might have been something like LARPing, something a little bit nerdy. And, people had written an account of it in a very sort of enthusiastic tone for the rest of the community, and someone had come across it and kind of lambasted it and mocked it. And his retort was like, that was context collapse. That enthusiastic, nerdy message board wasn't for you. It was for them. And us being, such, fledgling internet users, most of us, who didn't grow up on like tons of of message boards and news groups, like we don't realize it when we read something that it's not for us.
Right.
And he says, and context collapse is going to end eventually. Eventually we'll get fluent enough in the ways of online communication that we'll understand when something is for us and not for us. But that never happened.
Yeah, it's kind of naive sounding.
Well, in a way, I still see people's parents and my family members passing around like horrible, coronavirus hoax emails.
Right.
And, okay, first of all, here's what you do. Does your message have a link to an actual news source? Now, do you recognize that news source? And I've been walking people through this. And eventually I wrote a form email to all of that generation to be like, here's the context.
Right.
When you receive something, just because it's been published on a website, doesn't mean that it's true.
Right.
And I think back in the day, if something was published in a book or if it was published in a newspaper, there was some understanding that it had been vetted by people who knew better.
Right.
And they haven't understood the context. Like anyone can publish something online, which is great because you don't need to get a publisher to just publish your /fiction, Star Wars fantasy, but you still can publish total manipulative garbage and conspiracy theories and
like
whatnot,
shooting
and
it
people
raw.
read it.
Like shooting it raw.
Anyway, so the fragmented thing about language and the fragmented thing about social media, you'll have Twitter, for instance, and somebody will wake up and be like, oh God, I wish my husband wouldn't chew so loud. And somebody else will be like, don't you see that they're like, this person was killed, in what seems to be a lynching in the United States, and you don't care? There are way worse things happening in the world than your husband chewing. You're like, Twitter's a diary and people post banal comments all the time. And it's also a place where people post news articles or cries for help or reporting on things before they hit the news. Like, it's supposed to be so many things, and you're supposed to have the fluency to look at it.
Right.
And to understand the context in which it was posted, whether that person was comparing the chewing sounds that their husband makes while eating Cheerios to, in terms of gravity to, a big global pandemic. Like, no, of course they're not, but people still feel free to make that assumption. And I think about a story you told me, actually, after you had your brain injury and you went to see a movie and you didn't understand how movies worked.
Yeah.
Is that a correct recollection?
No, dead on. I couldn't see it. I couldn't see what was on the screen. I was just like, it was just light and shadow, and I just couldn't see it. Yeah. Yeah. Huh.
I think about that as a
good analogy.
Really spoken about it, but I think I really did sort of incorporate that as a personal analogy of, like, sometimes when people see stuff, they really just see maybe the light and shadow. They don't see the nuance and the context around it. And I think that I give people credit for being able to do that, and perhaps they're not.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Like, you've got a son who's 13 years old. He is for sure becoming more media. His exposure to media with you as his parent, I'm sure he has a really good, a much better platform to understand what is coming or flying into his eyeballs. I kind of feel that parents, or all of us, are dealing with a new reality that we're all learning as we go about. It's like, oh, we have to do what? And then we're just trying to make sense of it. And then as a parent, you're trying to filter that for your child, right? So given what you know, if you were to rate his, and it's really funny, as we're talking about this, his photo of kissing you on the cheek is on the screen simultaneously. So it's just this loving, like, oh, look at these two cute things. It's so sweet. But okay, so how do you approach and how do you rate your own ability to help him understand how to kind of chew through the media?
Yeah, I over-explain things. So at a certain point, he starts to tune out. Okay. But sometimes we have good conversations, and I'm able to catch him and perhaps also catch myself before I become too didactic. But he's pretty good. He's pretty smart. Like, we talk about, one thing I always tell him is, if someone's trying to scare you, they're trying to control you. Yeah. And think about why somebody tells you something and what they're trying to, what reaction they're trying to get with that information from you, what they're trying to evoke. We were watching a TikToker who is one of the more famous, children on the platform, and she has all these brand deals and stuff. And when the Black Lives Matter protests were at their height, she posted a TikTok thing where she said, listen, guys, I just want to let you know, I had the fist up as my icon, and then I took it down, but I did have it up for 12 hours. I just took it down because blah, blah, blah. And she was kind of explaining it, and saying, I still really think this is an important issue, and Black Lives Matter, and we should all do our best to sort of seek justice for this issue, and this shouldn't go on for anymore. We need to change the world. Very sort of you could tell it was really awkward for her. And it was also really weird that somebody was asking this child to come up with some sort of a statement, statement on a really complicated issue. Like, poor kid. And so I asked Gabriel what he thought of it. And he said something really funny. He said, I think she was trying to look really serious and be taken seriously. And you could tell because she wasn't wearing any makeup.
Interesting. It's interesting to decode it. It's interesting to how is that impacting how you therefore read media? You know, because are you always sort of looking at it as a parent? What would my son think by looking at this? Like, do you make that extra step as well?
Well, it's interesting because he doesn't look at the stuff that I look at. You know, emails are old to kids, you know, and even texting is kind of old. Like, they tend to message each other through apps and have conversations while they're playing games. And, you know, the Instagram Messenger was a big one last year. TikTok Messenger is still a thing. He's seen stuff that I'm not aware of and I can't control it, and that scares me. So all I can do is arm him with critical thinking. But one thing I did tell him, because we were talking about George Floyd, and I have not watched that video. And I don't need to.
Sure.
There's so much, only so much pain that you can take in before it starts to have an effect on your soul. You know? And I told him about it, and he's like, "Oh, I've seen it. It was on TikTok."
Fuck.
And I'm like, I said, you know,
that's brutal.
And I said pretty much the version of what I said to you, like, choose what you take in, because sometimes you do need to see these things. We ended up watching Do the Right Thing. I forgot about the scene where Radio Raheem gets choked out by the police and dies. I don't know why. I guess I blocked it out. And so we watched. You know,
you forgot a scene in a movie. Okay. Oh, no.
That I watched 20 years ago. Yeah. Great movie still. And he really enjoyed it. But, you know, it's violent. It's hard to watch that scene. And so I said, you know, you really have to pick what you watch. Like, there's understanding something. Sometimes you need to see something to understand that it's real. But once you know something's real, to continue exposing yourself to scenes of violence is not, like, good for you.
No,
you know?
Course. It's really intense because everything is so accessible as well. Right.
Yeah.
Let's shift track a second.
Sure.
Because while you were talking before, it sparked two different sort of channels. One of them was when I was working in a computer animation company, we would just do episode after episode after episode. And after a while, it just bled into each other. And in a way, it's like, which episode did you like the most? I don't even remember them, right? So if we were to say, look in the past year, is there one show, topic, thing that stood out as being meaningful and meaningful in any sense of the word, that stands out, that you say, like, this one little thing is like the iceberg that stands out?
Well, recently, and maybe I'm cheating because I'm going just to a month ago.
That's fine. What? Who cares? Listen, it's your brain. It's how it works.
I very privileged to get to work on a documentary strand at CBC called Short Docs. And it's a lot of emerging filmmakers making often their first documentary. I got a chance to see this documentary called Kayamenta. And I think that's the right word. It means sharing of truths in Cree.
Okay.
And it's about women going through menopause.
Okay.
And, you know, that's the next stage for me. I guess any year now, I'm going to start feeling those changes in my body and my hormones. I'm so curious about it. My mom's not around to talk about it. I have my sister who's older than me. You know, there's not a whole lot of literature. There's not a whole lot of, it's always been seen kind of as a butt of a joke or a path to irrelevance or something. And I think about, I watched this and it was really great in the sense that, like, these women had decided to come together and talk about, like, what it had meant to them. So this woman named Jules was a filmmaker, brought together these really awesome women from Indigenous nations across, like, Canada, but also a Maori woman from New Zealand. And they just laugh their asses off and share stories that are funny, but also somewhat painful. And, you know, what does it mean? Like, when you have all these ceremonies about coming into womanhood, Indigenous culture, there's this, you know, one woman says that her mother told her a story that an old lady comes to you. The old lady comes to you when you first get your period. But she said there's no ceremony when she leaves. You never get to say miigwech. You never get to say thank you. And I was thinking about that. I was thinking about that passage of how we need to honor every part of our lives. And I've thought a lot about the whole kind of idea of, like, you know, the maid and mother crone kind of, like, troika. And the crone is always seen as such a witchy word, you know. But there's so much like difference in different cultures, and you know, what does it mean when you get to that point in your life, and who has made it there with you is one of it. You know, for this woman, she talks about how for many years a lot of women didn't make it to their 50s and 60s. You know, so celebrating that. But are there ceremonies and are there ways that we can sort of make things more sacred and honor them and celebrate them?
Yeah. Okay. That's a great story.
That was a cool one.
That's great.
Yeah.
So Hong Kong right now is unbelievably eggshelly. Tons of eggshells. Everybody, everywhere. Everybody's just like, what the fuck is happening? And
like actual eggshells?
No. People don't know what to do with this security law. And so I had posted on Facebook this thing saying, okay, everybody, just my family, saying, okay, look, we're not in the hot spot. We're safe. We're okay. You know, we're talking about our security. And I put a link to a press article that talked about it. And then people said, oh, thank you, but you should probably take that down. It's just like, oh, okay, because you don't know if that's too political, you don't know. So it's like this real like fear. It's a culture of fear, right? And I was talking to somebody about that and saying that we're going through these shocks, right? So, you know, like Naomi Klein was talking about the shock doctrine. She's talking about like, you know, how shocks are used for economic gain. But in this particular case, like we're going through these sort of emotional and very powerful shocks. And that my concern is that it's creating this prolonged fear is creating a trauma in people and creating a sort of a fearful understanding of how the world works. And, you know, like my daughter is so, like, she's 8, so very impressionable about, you know, COVID-19, wearing masks and all this stuff. She finds public spaces extremely, stressful because, you know, people aren't wearing masks and I just don't want to be in a bus. And it's like ultimately being fearful about being in public. So how do you feel that's impacted on how people are connecting with each other through either socially or also through your work or whatever, like in your life, like your experience in the past, say, I guess 13 weeks, whatever that's been?
I want to talk about the experience of trauma and censorship and lack of freedom. And when I was in Israel, I met a lot of people who were from the former Soviet Republic and former Soviet Union. And they were very traumatized and very cynical people. Huh. The trauma came out in cynicism.
Oh, okay.
Is what I experienced.
Interesting.
A mistrust of authority and of government overreach. A lot of Russians became very right-wing Likudniks,
okay.
Right? Very, like, this is a horrible generalization, but I knew like a couple of guys who would just brazenly cheat on tests because fuck rules.
Oh, okay, right.
Who's making these rules anyway?
Right.
I think that it corrupts a society to feel that fear and to feel that mistrust. Here with COVID-19, there's also a lot of issue of trust. I don't want to get you in trouble by talking too much about politics.
No. It's fine. First of all, I can edit whatever, but on the other hand, just say it. No. Of course, trust is immense, and that's what's being eroded.
Trust is immense. There's, the trust in each other to take precautions. Going in to use someone's bathroom in their house is a deal. What are your bathroom rules? Trying to figure out if Gabriel can have play dates with a friend.
Sure.
Although he hates that I call them play dates.
Yeah, of course.
He's 13.
Of course.
Hangout time.
Yeah.
With a friend. And his mom's a nurse.
Yeah.
Are we comfortable with that?
Sure.
And what is she exposed to? She's not in a hospital. She actually sees people in their homes who don't have COVID, who are actually probably less exposed to the world than regular people because they're already immunocompromised. Anyway, so just going through all the steps and can we trust them and they're old friends, and if they were sick or if they're exposed, they would tell us, or would they? All the stuff becomes what is your, I don't know. It takes
a lot of psychic energy and attention, and it's right. So I brought Cadence over to Savannah in order to sort of escape COVID when it came to Hong Kong at first. And then 7 weeks later, when it started popping up in the US, it was like, okay, let's go back to Hong Kong. So we came back to Hong Kong. And so Hong Kong is about 2 months ahead of where Canada is in terms of like it seems. And just to say that there is normalcy coming back. Like we still, like Cadence, for example, is going to camps. She's going to go to surf camp and she plays basketball with her friends outside.
Awesome.
Yeah. So it's coming back, you know, people like, but only because people here are been, and I think Canada's also really good. America is, legendarily bad at having good practices and precautions, but the local infection rates are like there haven't been any local recorded in the past 2 or 3 weeks. So it's been very good. So it gets better, is what I'm saying to you. For you, it gets better.
I hope so. And I think school is going to be such a mindfuck. I don't know what's going to happen with us. I don't know how we're not going to be exposed to it. And I have a dear friend who is what they're calling a long hauler. Mm-hmm. Have you heard that expression before? No. So there are people who get through COVID, but then experience something that's kind of like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue.
Okay. Okay.
So you know how like if you got like dengue fever or malaria, it stays in your system. It's almost like there's a ghost in the cells. Right. And every now and then it sort of like, remember this?
Yeah.
And so she's been experiencing that since March 17th.
Oh, wow.
And she'll be fine one day and then like terrible fevers and sweats.
Holy shit.
Stomach
and this is somebody you know.
Yeah, I just saw her yesterday.
Wow. Wow. Full on.
She's really, really weak and she was fit. And,
wow.
You know, in her 40s and
full on.
Yeah, it's weird.
Huh.
So there are a lot of people. And then there's another woman I know who is a personal trainer who's like basically got mono, like all the symptoms of mono after having had COVID.
Whoa.
So she's been diagnosed with Epstein-Barr, which is like, she had it when she was a teenager and now it's sort of like almost like resurfaced, but I don't totally understand if it's that or if it's just all the symptoms presenting themselves as such. So yeah, it's scary. It is really, really scary. And I'm scared of getting it myself because, you know, being around people who are sick, like it is, you want to, sometimes it feels like you're going through these strange rituals, you know, like, okay, now I'm going to put on the hand sanitizer and now we'll move our chairs this much apart. And now we'll like, ask, you know, be careful. I'll take off my shoes when I go here and, you know, wash this down with like a wipe and all the stuff seems like almost like rosaries, you know, right. You're trying to make something tangible out of a tangible action of something that's invisible, like faith. But
exactly, it's almost like this. It's this weird religious, like it's a really interesting connection. So like these weird kind of quasi-religious, like you do it out of faith. Okay, so I do the precaution A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, you know, and then that's very interesting. Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Do
you know what other song works?
What?
Do you know the song "Buckets of Rain"?
No.
By Bob Dylan?
No.
The first verse is a perfect hand washing song.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. I don't know. Well, it's really good to connect. It's really, and here's the funny thing. So we've been talking for about an hour and, I don't know if this podcast will go anywhere, but I know that I enjoy the conversations and it's always nice to sort of catch up and talk philosophically or just aesthetically or whatever it is about the images and to kind of enjoy people's energy a little bit. So ending them is always kind of like, okay, well, thank you.
Can I tell you a story about the first picture?
Yes.
So I've been having a lot of dreams lately, as have a lot of my friends. It's kind of a thing, I think. And I've been dreaming about my past. The only other time that I had really intense, memorable dreams was when I was pregnant with Gabriel.
Okay.
And I wrote down one of my dreams. I told you that I've been unpacking boxes and finding old journals. The dream that I had a week before he was born was one of my post-apocalyptic dreams where I'm walking through a burnt out landscape and I found this like black sand hill that I sit on top of. And there are all these scarlet birds that are like flamingos, but they're reddish, like bright, like pinky red.
Right.
And they're just sort of like strangely, but there's so many of them just sort of surrounding me and walking peacefully around me. And it was such a strange image. It's so beautiful and scary and sad, but like rich. And Gabriel has been really into flamingos as a kid, like ever since. Like, he's been kind of like the bird that he chooses to be his avatar for things, to the point where we actually got a Audubon. Sorry, it took me a while to remember that word.
Problem.
You know, the Audubon bird paintings of a flamingo, and got it off of Etsy and got it framed for his room just past couple of weeks. So when I saw this picture of myself looking at that flamingo, I was like, there's that image that's connecting all of that.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Did you ever read a book called The Scarlet Ibis?
No.
Ibis? I don't know. It's one of those words I've never heard out loud.
I'll say it for you, Ibis.
Ibis, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, Ibis. Ibis. I think it's Ibis.
So it was a short story that Gabriel had to read for some of his homeschool quarantine homework. So he said, I think you're going to love it. So he gave it to me to read. I'm like, what the heck's scarlet ibis? And I looked it up, and it was the bird from my dream. That flamingo-like bird, shorter legs, but bright pinky red.
Nice.
And anyway, flamingos, ibis.
Ibis.
It's funny when imagery just sort of follows you around your whole life.
I was reading this book, Robert Sapolsky. So first I read it, and it's a monster, and it's so smart. And it's called Behave, essentially explaining the biology of why people behave at their best and their worst. And it's bonkers intelligent. And so then I read it. It took about 8 months to chew through it, and then now I'm listening to it as a podcast, as an Audible book again. So I'm listening to it so I can get maybe a different perspective. And he sort of talks about how our brains are physiologically, we can only take so much. So for example, he says when we can't compete when we go out and have the sweets that we have, and the are you multitasking as we speak? I'm
looking up the name of that book. Robert
Sapolsky, Sapolsky. It's called Behave. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. So smart. So amazing. So he talks about how, for example, one of the reasons why our diets are so overwhelming for us is that, think about 50,000 years ago, somebody walking around in their usual diet. If they could get some honey every once in a while, that was crazy, right? That was oh my God, their brains would explode. Now you go to a store, you can have foods, a range of food to drink or to eat that is 100 times sweeter than honey could ever be, right? And the same thing in terms of rich food and fat and all this stuff. He says, of course we become addicted to this stuff because our brains are just incapable of having those hits and the crazy dopamine that comes with that intensity. And so he talks about, for example, cocaine or whatever, that's all about boosting the dopamine. And then your brain is just need more, and that's kind of, in a way, that's media.
It's too much. It's impossible to look away, but I also feel like it's irresponsible to look away. If it wasn't for digital media, if it wasn't for the internet, I wouldn't understand that this pain existed. And I feel that I've been so sheltered, and so everything has been so overshadowed by my own personal little animal needs. And then to be able to get this wide panopticon perspective on all these different selves of suffering.
But you're not responsible. Let me write you a "you're not responsibility" check. Here
but I am though. I've said things
for the world. That's a lot. That's a lot.
I've said things that were inadvertently hurtful because I didn't understand people's pain.
As a 20-year-old, as a 30-year-old,
sure. And I don't think that hopefully no one's like, carrying that around with him and, angry. I mean, she said that thing once. I don't think that's the case, but I do think that it's your responsibility to inform yourself about, there's so much people talk about your own privilege. I think it's become almost a cliche, but I do think it's important to inform yourself about other people's realities and their pains and your privilege and how that informs their pain. Like, that is your responsibility for sure. Like, we were listening to this, like, you remember the CBC show Ideas?
Uh-huh.
They had this big piece on slavery in Canada. Do you know Canada had African slaves and Indian slaves?
Sure.
We call them Indigenous slaves. They call them Anis. Fucked up. We were never told that in school. We were not told that. We were told about the Underground Railroad. We saved slaves.
No, well, you don't tell the kids the nightmare stuff. You tell kids the palatable, acceptable stuff.
No, you don't. In Germany, they tell kids about the Holocaust. I mean, not young kids, but the result, the country has been able to metabolize their history and also, ideally, at least if they're educated properly, come out of it with a renewed conviction that they're not going to let society go down that rabbit hole again.
Of course.
We were never taught about residential schools. We were never taught about slavery in America, especially. You see suffering because so much of their society, their societal ills and wealth were built on slavery and not being able to address it and not being able to offer any sort of reparation. I mean, the Germans offered reparations, whatever, you think of those. That was they dealt with it right then and there. And they're still dealing with it by educating people. And they have particular laws that deal with it. We've never dealt with it. And so important. So we're listening to this Ideas show. And then it's interesting because, a friend of mine's son, she talks a lot about social justice with her son. And he once said to her, she's white. And he once said to her, is slavery not slavery, he said, is racism my fault because I'm white? And she said, no, you're 9. But it's your job to fix it. It's your job to make this world better and more equal. And so we're listening to this Ideas show, and Chris's family on his mom's side comes from this like really fancy old Ontario family called the Bubby family. I guess what name comes up in this show on slavery?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so
interesting.
I think about, it's our family's job doubly so to fix it.
Sure.
We all benefit from having oppressed other people on some level. I'm just, as a Jewish person, I'm so used to looking at our past and seeing victimhood. Sure. I'm not used to being aligned with the oppressor. And, well, it's also
what a great note to end this podcast. No, but I think very, very interesting. If we can find links to the Ideas show and anything else, send it to me so I can include it with the podcast notes in case somebody wants to.
Okay.
You sort of check that out. Thank you so much, Adina.
Thank you so much for joining me, Randall Fancy, for this episode of Shooting It Raw. I really appreciate it. If you want to learn more about the show in general or today's guest in particular, be sure to check out the episode notes at www.shootingitraw.com. That's shooting-it-raw.com. I appreciate everyone who takes some time out of their day to give Shooting It Raw a listen. So get out there, make amazing photos, and be sure to appreciate how amazing the world